Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the University of Manchester Middle East Centre online webinar on high-performance digital organizations, what data-driven leadership is needed beyond COVID-19 by Professor Erik Beulen. Just a bit more on our speaker today. Erik is a professor at Tilburg University and the academic director for the executive MSc Information Management and core faculty for the executive MSc IT-audit. He lectures Disruptive Technologies at Alliance Manchester Business School, part of the University of Manchester. Furthermore, Erik has 25 years of international industry experience at Accenture and Atos and consulting experience at Alvarez and Marsal, BCG and KPMG. He led global contracting engagements and advised CXOs in developing and implementing their global technology strategy, led engagements for global corporate clients that use global delivery centers in China, India, Brazil, and the US. His consulting engagements also include digital transformations, benchmarks, and audit. He is also the chairman of a company in the Netherlands, XBRL, and is a board member of Sourcing Netherlands. So thank you very much for being with us here today, Professor Erik, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much for that very concise introduction. Hello, everybody. I would like to talk to you today on high-performance digital organizations and how data-driven leadership can help us to move forward from what we're currently facing, the pandemic, COVID-19. In order to do so, I've prepared a couple of slides which I would like to discuss with you today. What I would like to do is also learn from you and get your input into this presentation. So I've got a couple of polls which I will use along the way just to be more specific towards what you see happening and to comment on that one. But before we're there, I would like to start looking at what is this all about, this data-driven leadership, and how can we make sure that we increase and improve business performance. So what I've done in order to demonstrate that is I took a study that BCG had been published in 2017. The way they looked at the world is what is the market capitalization of companies and how data-driven are these companies. So if we start from the left, from 2006, we can only see Microsoft there as a data-driven company in this top 10 companies globally, worldwide on market capitalization. But the more we move over time towards where we are now, May 2019, then we can see that 7 out of the 10 companies with the highest market capitalization in the world are data-driven companies. So I would say this tells us something, how important it is to be a data-driven company. That's just as a starter, just to see where we are and what is going on in the world. Let's just also look to volumes. There are 2 things which I would like to highlight when we talk about the volumes. There is an absolute increase in terms of the volumes of data that are around, that we're processing, that we use for decision making. But if we look to that, then what was traditionally in the core, transaction data, that has been supplemented by 3 types of other data types, which are human files, PowerPoint, Word files, Excel, all that we collect and that we use just to do our daily work, but also social interactions. And I think the most important growth, which is really hyper growth, is in machine generated data. And so think here, Internet of Things. We connect machine to machine. We use that just to provide services like maintenance services. We use that in crowd control, all data that has been generated, and that is really going to further in future improve the data volumes that are around. So if we know this, then that substances, what we saw earlier in terms of market capitalization, we need to manage that. That is why data-driven leadership is important. Let's just go here to a very famous quote, which is coming from Clive Hunley. He did that in 2006. And what he said was, data is the new oil. I want to take away some misconceptions here, because in generally it's understood as oil is valuable, data is valuable, that is why data is the new oil. That isn't entirely correct. So the way that he explained that is basically say, you need to make sure that you do a lot of things to data to make them valuable, to make them into information which we can use. Similar to what we see in terms of refining oil. Then it becomes value. Then it is worthwhile to use it, and it gets that value. And that's the same thing which we see with data. And that is also what data-driven leadership is all about. Make sure that you add value to the data, that can be used in your company to make decisions, to operate more efficiently, and what have you. And that is what I want to talk with you today. But if we look where we are today, then we're not doing so good. In a very recent study of this year, we see some statistics which are a bit concerning. And this is an American survey in the Fortune Top 1000, where they basically get feedback from C-level business and technology executives. And what was the outcome of this survey was that under half of the companies that were participating in the survey were competing on analytics. That's a bit low. We would have hoped by now, when we do understand the value of data, that would be much, much higher. Also, the number of companies that really manage data as a business asset, under 50%. Again, disappointing. When we look at how data-driven organizations are, then only 1/3 label themselves as a data-driven organization. Again, that's also low. And if we look to a true data culture, also there, under 30%. I would argue, looking to the outcome of this very recent survey, we need to do better. And that's what I want to talk with you today. How can we do better? How can we use data in our advantage to make a better business performance for our organization? In order to do that, I would like post-COVID-19 take two lenses. First of all, compliance, and then I would like to continue with the management perspective. In terms of compliance, I think I can talk over 2 hours, maybe half a day on GDPR. That's a EU data privacy legislation. That is obviously having a very big impact on data and what we can do with data, but I don't want to bore you with that. That is something where we just need to adhere to, need to work around. But let's just focus, if we talk about compliance, on the inclusion of enterprise social and governance disclosure. Because if we look to that, then I would argue that materiality has always been something which should be taken into account when you're doing financial reporting. So if they're in the area of environment, social or governance, any disclosures that needs to be made, then also in the financial reporting that needs to be reported. If we look to what companies have done pre-COVID, then only a handful of companies have proactively self-identified the pandemic risk as part of their financial disclosure. And so that indicates that the financial disclosures are not enough just to truly assess a company and how a company is doing. There needs to be an inclusion of environmental, social, and governmental disclosures. Within the EU, there's a lot of emphasis on that. Predominantly for the larger companies with more than 500 employees, they are about to be enforced as part of compliance to disclose also enterprise, social, and governance disclosures. There is a consideration to do that with XBRL, which is a communication standard similar as there is for financial reporting. So that is an aspect where I want you to think about and say, okay, good. If I look to the risk profile of my company, well, did I see as a company the pandemic risk coming? And that's where I would like to open up for the first poll, where you're invited to vote for if you have included this pandemic risk in your financial reporting, in your risk log, or not. Can we open the poll, William?
Absolutely, yeah. Just launched a poll, so results are coming in as we speak.
Okay. Can participants, including myself, see that at the moment? Yeah, I can see it. Perfect. Well, the numbers are still floating, so that's good. Let's just can we close the poll, please, William? Because I'm quite surprised by the outcome, because 42% of you says that they have included had this pandemic risk as part of their financial reporting. That is very different from what we have seen in that study, which was done by Waters Technology, where they identified that only a handful of companies have done that. I'm very pleased with that, because this indicates that you as participants collectively have got a better eye for risk than what was coming out of this survey. So I very much welcome that. But especially for future, that is something which I think your companies need to continue to do. I would leave here the compliance perspective for today, because I would like to focus today in my talk on management. So if we conclude that most organizations are not data-centric, where the architecture is data-driven, where that's really a core asset, where data models perceive applications, and let alone that there is a data-driven culture. I think that is where we are today. So what we need to do, the challenges that we have, is just to ensure that there is an unbiased and data-driven decision-making in our organizations. And that is something which I would put first and foremost. In order to do that, I think organizations need at the minimum to address the following. 1, low data quality. 2, poor data governance. Ensure that there are minimal data capabilities in the organization. Make sure that there is data-driven leadership. That is all what needs to be addressed. And if we do that, then we can benefit to the maximum of data. In order to manage that, there is a central role for the chief data officer, because the chief data officer, that is the person who creates and executes data and analytic strategies to drive business value. So that is very much on a C-level, chief data officer. That's why strategy is something which is there at the heart. And in order to do so, they leverage existing data, they enrich data by argumenting data, by combining internal and external data, and especially the latter one, external data. That is something which is not easy and not straightforward, because you need to integrate that, make sure that definitions of data are the same, and then combine that. Also, they have a focus on monetizing data. I will come back to that later in the presentation, as well as protecting data in terms of security. I think that is something which is important and which is all the responsibility of the chief data officer. There are 2 things which I would like to add to, let's say, this role description of the chief data officer. 1, the focus on a continuous improved decision making. So that means that you need to think in cycles. How can you make sure that is supported. You need to look for patterns in terms of positive, virtuous circles, or in terms of negative, vicious circles. And that is in terms of making sure that you use that data where you need the support and guidance of a chief data officer. That is similar for cultivating the data-driven approach. Make sure that you do something about data literacy, educational programs, leading by example, and that is something where a lot of companies just have started their journey. It's not the chief data officer and his team, it's the entire organization. And that is something in terms of change which needs to be driven by the chief data officer. So in order to do that, there is also a very important task to change the role as a chief data officer from only risk mitigation. It's really adding business value by treating data as an asset. And in order to do that, there is a task that needs to be done. And there are three things which the data and analytics team should focus on. First of all, enhancing data quality, reliability, and access. That is, I would say, the basics. And then make sure that there is an analytics decision-making possible. And then make sure that you also can use that not only to drive your business, but also to innovate the products and services that you're delivering. That makes it into something where the chief digital officer is adding value. But let's just take a closer look at their role. Are they really operating on a strategic level? Let's say on board level. I'm not sure. If we look to this research which is done by Gartner, then we can see they're balancing between strategic and between tactical. Most of the tasks that we see here are tasks that are far more operational. That has to do with in how many companies the chief data officer is positioned. It's more positioned in just fixing things, more related to what I said earlier to you in terms of the risk than that it is related to setting a strategy and implementing that. So that is in terms of where there is room for improvement, but I would argue for now it's really at the time to have a CDO, to have a chief data officer in your organization just to drive data and data processing in your organization. What I would like to understand from you here as audience is what is the primary focus that your chief data officer has today, just to see if that is matching what we can learn from this 2018 research coming from Gartner. So William, can you open up the second poll, please? Well, we can see that a lot of organizations still are without a chief data officer. But let's just continue to do the voting, because I'm really curious to see how, for you as an entire group of people participating in this webinar, the scores are. I think let's just close the poll here. So what we can see is a 44% of the participants are working for organizations who doesn't have a chief data officer. That's a high number. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting something 20, 25% or something like that, and then also specifically related to size. If you're a very small company, then we would not expect to have a chief data officer. So it's for the larger typically multinational companies to have a chief data officer. And so that might be a very good explanation why we have here the 44%. But let's just put that aside, and let's just then see what the respondents have, what US respondents have indicated as a core focus for those organizations who do have a chief data officer. What I find very encouraging is that there is the highest score for supporting the ecosystem, because that is where the true value is. Not only in your own company, but really focusing on supporting value chains where you as an individual company are part of. And having that type of focus, I would say, is very encouraging and very mature. So that would also be, if you have the basics right as a chief data officer, where I would focus my attention to in order to be as strategic as possible. So let's just then move from here. What I would like to do is just to set a bit of the stage for some of the slides I'm going to use in the remainder of this lecture, is to talk a little bit about a study which I've recently concluded. And that study was about, is data and analytics maturity correlated to business effectiveness and performance? So let me quickly answer that. The answer was yes. Yes, it was positively correlated. So it does make sense to focus on data analytics maturity, because that is bringing us business effectiveness and better business performance. So in this study, I did a survey, 62 companies. I did 10 interviews with C-level technology leaders, and I organized 3 workshops just to get around ideas and to further understand and deepen insights for that. At the end of my presentation, you will find a link where you can download this study. It's for free, so please use that. I think it's important to say that I've performed this study as a full professor at my business school from Tilburg University, TIAS. The knowledge partner for this study was TCS, Tata Consultancy Services, and it was done in association with ICT Media, which is a community of chief information officers, chief data officers, chief digital officers here in the Netherlands. So that just to put some context about data and insights that I'm going to show to you in the upcoming slides. What I want to do is just to do a little bit of deep dive into 2 important things: data democratization to start with, and then data ownership. So if we're talking about data democratization, then I think it's important that we make sure that we all understand what this is all about. Data democratization is about timely access to relevant data in a fit-for-purpose format for all authorized users. And authorized users is very important. So if we look to that, then data democratization is not access for all, because that is data anarchy. Data democratization is all about getting employees excited. This is what you can do with data, and that is what we need to stimulate when we're going to embark on data democratization. But that is not something which is very easy. There are 3 things which are required to successfully implement the concept of data democratization. 1, there needs to be data ownership. And why? Because that is safeguarding data quality, and that's the basis. If the quality of your data is bad, then, well, don't expect that you get any value from your data. And I will talk about data ownership in a minute, because as I already said, that's the second deep dive which I would like to do. Secondly, what is important is identity and access management. And again, this is not straightforward. And there are a lot of tools available. So I mentioned here a few: Okta and Microsoft Azure, Active Directory, Ping Identity, but it's not simple and it's not straightforward. So you need to put a lot of attention to that to ensure that you can make the data available for authorized users only. And then lastly, the security. that is always a concern, and that is something which with working from home, which we have done all on a large scale, is not a given. So we need to continue to pay attention to that. If we want to implement that, then I think it's also important to look to the different aspects that we have in terms of data democratization. And the data democratization is one from a development perspective. If we look to that, where we have platform as a service type solutions in terms of artificial intelligence. So think here about SaaS, think here about network, and that is really helping to further and develop this type of solutions. If we look to the democratization of data and to analytics, then again we see here a lot of tools, and these tools are really helping also people which are not full data scientists just to work with the data. And that in terms of the data democratization is helping it a step forward. What we also see is that there's a lot of democratization in the design. I think here low-code functionality. And so basically you can build your own functionality as if you were a coder with this type of low-code code solutions. And then lastly, the democratization of knowledge. And so what we see is that data literacy and making it work, that is something which is very important. But is that sufficient? Do you need not more than only training? Is there also really a change in terms of culture, in terms of behavior, than only instead of capabilities? I think that culture is an important addition to only have the how-to questions answered. And that is in terms of successfully democratizing the knowledge related to data democratization. I think that is important to focus on. So keep that in mind in terms of what is necessary to successfully have added value, create value from data. Then I would like to talk a little bit about data ownership. And what I would like to do is here to share with you some results of the study that I have conducted earlier this year, which helps us in understanding data ownership better, because that is ensuring data quality. A couple of observations. Organizations where IT application owners are the data owner are typically not well positioned to encourage data usage, and more importantly, also to improve data quality. They are not seen as very strong holders to make this work. Two, if there is only business owners who are the data owners, then we'll have silos. My department holds this data and I'm maintaining it, but the accessibility for other parts in the organization is typically poor. That is why data silos are not very welcome and are not are hindering creating value from data. There are also organizations where chief information officers are the data owners. That is typically a very technocratical setup, and that is in terms of how can we use data, not something which is typically very successful. And there is not much attention to data literacy. There is really a focus on tools, and that is not very helpful. And this is again where the role of the chief data officer comes in. There is that ownership for corporate data. That is avoiding what we just learned from the silos when business owners are data owners. And in addition to that, these chief data officers are responsible for data governance, data literacy, and that in combination with business ownership for business unit specific data, where there is no harm on having that only in the silo because that business unit is the only user of that data. That's a very powerful combination. But then you also need to make sure that there is a support in terms of the technology. And that is where the chief information officer comes in. He needs to bring in the tools, maintain that, and that is the type of support that has been delivered. So if the responsibilities for the chief data officer, for the business owners, and for the chief information officer are split in that way, then I would argue you have a good setup for success, and that way of structuring data ownership ensures data quality. I think now it's time for a little bit of a real-life example, just to bring this a little bit more to life. So I used Boskalis, and in order to give this some context, I'll put here in a company profile. And so this is a company, about 10,000 employees, 90 countries, and what they're basically doing is they're doing dredging, they're doing offshore transportation and installation solutions. So they are really, let's say, a company with boats, and they operate on a global scale. So they were doing that successful for many, many decades. And then they find out that they weren't very good in maximizing the value of data. And that's where they have built a cloud-based, centrally managed platform with global information on geology, on workability, on ecology, but also on vessel information, and more importantly, on tender information, because this is quite straightforward. In order to win a bid to dredge a harbor, you need to come there with your optimal equipment at a good price level, and then you win the business. So the more you know about the harbor, the more you know where your vessels are, the more you know where the vessels of your competitors are, the better you do. And that is what this Boskalis .world is all about. This cloud-based platform, that is something which is helping them in a very, very good way. Let's take a closer look here at Boskalis .world. So if we look to the tendering process, then a certain harbor says, okay, well, who can dredge my harbor? That RFP is going into this application, this Boskalis .world. As a result of that, there's coming proposals, and hopefully for Boskalis, there's going to be a winning contract. How is that supported by this cloud application? Of course, they have their contract management database. That is very structured data that includes everything in terms of historical information about work that they have done. Important to build upon a proposal in a response to an RFP. There is also vessel tracking information that is structured but open data. So you and I can go to this type of website, and then we can see where are the vessels. That are vessels from Boskalis, but also from their competition. So they know at what location the vessels are, which is important because traveling to a location, to a harbor that needs to be dredged, needs to be taken into account. Which is the vessel that is best fit for purpose to go to a harbor. Structured, open data. There is also geology information. That is a combination of structured and unstructured data, of open data, of proprietary data. That is important to understand. What have we learned from last time when we were dredging that harbor? How long had a competitor 5 years ago done in terms of time spending in dredging that harbor? What type of boats were they using, equipment, and that is helpful information to come to a good proposal. But that's not all. So this data is being supplemented with weather information. And again, that is unstructured, structured data, open data, proprietary data. Also that is necessary just to make sure that you understand the specific conditions which you're going to operate on to a very, very high degree. But that's not all. You also need other information, unstructured data, open data, think about social data, anything that helps you just to come forward with the best possible proposal and then into winning. And what I hope that we learn from this is that there is a whole set of data that is going into this application, which in the tendering process of Boskalis makes it for them possible to come forward with the best possible price and best possible terms and conditions, and therefore basically having data-driven winning of business at Boskalis. And I think that is, in terms of an example, a very traditional company using the value of data at the max. And what is at the basis of doing something like this successfully? One of the things we learned from the study that I did this year was that understanding the basics and having that in place, that is something which is important. A bit sad, but what we learned also from the survey that we did, that there were none of the 62 companies doing a best-in-class on all of the 5 aspects, which are the basics for data-driven organizations. And that's something which is quite telling. So there is a lot of improvement. So what are these 5 basics where you really need to focus on? And these 5 basics are obviously in addition to what we can see in terms of making sure that your data quality is good. First one is ensuring high quality data management. So think here, having your governance in place, having processes in place, identity and access management, just to really make sure that you can work with the data in a proper way. What is also important is that there is a lot of automation. And I put here optimal analytics automation, but what I really mean is full analytic automation. The more you have automated, the better you're able just to add value. Thirdly, there is the inclusion of external unmanaged data and open data. We saw that in the example of Boskalis. And I said earlier, including external data, that is something which is extremely difficult. So you need to work on that to enable that within your organization. If you look to the types of platforms, then data lakes and active data warehouses are the type of analytics platforms that should be added to the traditional databases that your organizations are using and most likely will continue to use, but enrich them with data lakes and active data warehouses. And finally, an optimal cloud adoption. And again here, what I do mean is a full cloud adoption. This is something, a domain where you should not be constrained about the availability and capacity that you need for performing these analytics. So as a chief data officer, these are the areas where you really need to make sure that you are having a good standard, because that is the foundation, the basis for doing that. So let's just then see in terms of the effectiveness of data analytics to really improve business effectiveness and performance. So what you can see here is a quadrant with the top right quadrant where there are only 9 organizations. So only 9 organizations are data-centric, high-performance digital organizations. For all the other organizations, there's a lot to improve. Let me explain here this graph a little bit better. There are 2 scores. There is a sector data analytics maturity comparison score, and there is a business performance score. Let me start with the sector data analytics maturity comparison score. That is, how good is an organization compared to the industry average? You're competing in the market, so doing better than your competition will put you forward as a high performance organization. If you're doing less in terms of your maturity, then, well, you don't do so good. So you really need to work on that. So that is putting you forward here to over the 50%. And so the bigger the difference, the more you're towards the 100% on that axis. On the other axis, there is the business performance score. And where we looked at it is, okay, good. How is that in terms of agility, in terms of data performance, in terms of how to use that, in terms of really business benefits? And that is in terms of having there a bigger contribution of data towards all these business 4.0 aspects where you're getting a higher score. And so you see that there's a lot of companies who struggle to get over the 50% here. and then basically are putting themselves forward as a high-performance digital organization in the quadrant of data-centric. So if we look to that, then there are three insights which I would like to share from this study. First of all, let's start with monetization in mind. I'm going to talk about monetization in a minute. Get the basics right. We just talked about that. And also the performance of data and analytics assessment. What we learned in this study is that the companies that are in that top right quadrant, that 7 out of the 9 have performed an assessment, where overall there is less than 50% of the participants of the study that performed an assessment. So there seems to be a correlation between having that focus and being a data-centric, high-performance digital organization. So that is, in terms of insights, what I would like to share with you. What I'm curious is how mature your organization is in terms of data and analytics. And in order to do a little bit of an assessment of that, I would like to talk you through the different maturity levels. These are the maturity levels that knowledge partner Tata Consultancy Services is using in their data model. And that is, I think, a good way of structuring this discussion. There are many maturity models, so this is not the Holy Grail, but this is also something which I've used in this study, and it's more important that you see where you're on a scale than what type of maturity model you're using. So in this maturity model, and I'm going to ask you in a minute in a poll just to vote for your organization, there are 5 levels starting with siloed. And siloed is independent, technically capable within a business unit. So that is what we just also saw in the data ownership slide and discussion we had. Simplified, that is standard capabilities across the business, providing a strategic feasibility for the enterprise. So that's slightly better. Scale, operational excellence for real-time decisions at enterprise level. So their data-driven decision-making is about to embark. And then synergized, established digital ecosystems enabling complex event processing across the enterprise and its affiliates. So that is even wider than that. That's coming close to the ecosystem. And then finally, self-optimized, intelligent, automation-driven balance between human-centric and machine-centric decision-making using an ecosystem and pestle data. So these are the 5 maturity levels. And I'm curious to understand where you think that your company is on this scale. William, can you open up the next poll, please? I think you're an honest audience, which I think is good. Let's just close the poll here. I would like to repeat what I just said. I think you're an honest audience. And why? Because if you're doing a self-assessment, then sometimes you have audiences think, oh, well, I'm great and we're doing everything fine, and then just really vote for a maturity level, which is basically not factual. If I look to this, obviously I cannot make a proper judgment here, but the outcome from 60% having put in their votes is, I think, quite as expected. Very, very little on self-optimized and synergized. Scaled, a group, but the predominant majority is within siloed and within simplified. And that again indicates that organizations really need to work in terms of maturing their data and analytics in order to get that business benefit. So I think that was, I think very helpful for me to understand, but also demonstrates that a lot of work can be done in this area. Let's just move on to monetization. As I said, one of the insights from my study was start with the monetization in mind. What do you want to do with the data? Before, I would like to share here the results of my survey, of my research project. I would like to define the different types of monetization that there are, just to really make sure that we don't have a confusion on what this is. It's one, improving internal business processes and decisions. 2, wrapping information around service and products. And 3, selling data offerings to new and existing markets. That's also called commercialization. The latter is what some people think that's the only way of monetizing data. I think the true value for most companies is in the second one, wrapping information around products and services, and in terms of getting the basics right, improving the internal business processes and decisions. I think that is in terms of where to focus on. Despite the discussion that we only have touched very lightly on in terms of privacy, the GDPR legislation, which is in Europe, the third category of monetization is very, very difficult, and you really need to think through on how you want to make that work. If you start with the first 2 types of monetization, then I would argue you're on the right route. In my survey, I also asked the question, how mature, and I used the Likert scale up until 7, just to see where the organizations are. What we can see from this graph is that the majority basically haven't even thought about it. And that's a bit concerning. So we're spending money, we're putting people into power, we're changing processes, and we don't have an end goal, something which we want to achieve very clearly detailed. And that is something where I would say there is some work to be done. So if your chief data information officer cannot give a concise answer to what type of monetization he or she is looking for, then that is something to really worry. What I would like to do is also to put next to this some research coming from Gartner, because I also provide valuable insights in terms of, okay, this is something which is currently going on in the market. Also here, top benefit using information assets to improve internal processes. 60% out of their 200+ respondents. And so that is very much aligned with the 3 types of monetization and what I shared with you earlier in terms of a recommendation to move forward to. The new offerings, the last one, the 50% over the, so that's the third one, is also something which is there. So you can see that there is a type of a common understanding on what here you should focus on in terms of monetization. But make sure that you have that clear at the start. That brings me to a very busy graph here. So let me just first explain this graph, and then I would like to open up for some possibility to have a little bit of a deep dive on one of the individual measures. So you can indicate that via the chat what type of preference you have. So what we see here is in the study, I've identified 4 improvement themes. So what do we need to do to make things go better? First of all, make sure that the board of management is buying the idea. We need to anchor that with them. Secondly, we need to implement a data-driven mindset and culture. Thirdly, we need to make sure that there are investments in data analytics. And lastly, the monetization. For each of these themes, there were improvement measures which have been indicated by the respondents to the survey. So what you can see here is the number of respondents that have basically identified an improvement measure here to address one of the themes. So they could do suggest multiple improvement measures, so there was no limitation to that. For the purpose of the analysis, I also looked to what is the respondent organization in terms of the 4 quadrants? Is that something which has been really low, emerging data-driven organizations, or is that the data-driven high-performance digital organization? That is how this is structured, and this is in terms of a call for action where I would like to invite organizations to think through what is applicable for their organization and decide wisely and make improvements and implement one or more of these improvement areas measures as appropriate. So what I would like to do is give you the opportunity via the chat just to ask some more insights, in depth in terms of different measures. Any who can I see that? William, can you support me on seeing what's going on in the chat? Is there any question in the chat?
Yeah, there are several questions, Erik. Not related, I believe, to this particular graph exactly, unless there's a couple of coming in. Okay. But we have general questions if you'd like to go through them.
Yeah, that's fine. I've got there's still one slide which I would like to include, so there's definitely time for a couple of questions. So go ahead. What is? Can you read it out for me, please?
Absolutely. So the first one is the pandemic-driven digital transformation a threat to low data maturity organizations? Sorry.
Well, I would say yes, but let me. No, I'm not going to do that. The answer is yes, and the logic is quite simple. In a pandemic, you really need information, insights to make the right decision. Everything is different from your routine. So if everything is different from your routine, you need to think about scenarios. In order to make the best possible decision, the more information you have, the better you're able to respond to anything unknown what is coming towards you. And the pandemic is an example of something unknown. It's unprecedented. We don't know what's going to happen, but we need to know. And that is as simple as related to what is in stock, what are price levels doing for certain goods, what is demand doing. If you know that better, if you can anticipate on that, you can build scenarios and be prepared better. So therefore, organizations with a low level of data and analytics maturity will suffer more from these pandemic or any crisis that is going to happen.
Brilliant.
Is there another question?
Yeah, there is another one here. In the pandemic, are companies focusing too much on the tech transformation and not on the data and its value?
Okay. Yeah, technology is an enabler. That is how I would like to respond to this observation. And you need to think how you're going to use the technology to improve your ability to make decisions, to get better insights, and that is how you need to see technology. When I was talking about the role of the Chief Information Officer, then I put in there the word support. And that is exactly how I see the role of technology. It's very pivotal, it's really important, but it's supportive. So you need to think and put things data-centric. That is helpful, and that makes it possible to build the scenarios, to think things through based on the data, make the right decisions, and drive your company and improve performance.
Brilliant, thank you.
What I would,
we've got. Sure, sorry.
Yeah, what I would like to suggest is that I'm going to my closure site in order to be respectful to all of your time. And I'm very happy to take any questions. So as you can see here on the bottom, there's my email address. Feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to have a further discussion. So no worries there. My closing slide is in the line of the first question. You need to take action as data-driven leaders. And there are three things which I think that in any crisis, including the COVID-19 pandemic, you need to do. And that is, one, to ensure that data teams and the whole organization remain operational. So that is a big task. And so think about offshore locations where you need to deal with and what is important that they keep on running. You need to do a lot of that. You need to set up a nerve center. You need to focus on data protection. That is what it takes just to remain operational. Secondly, I think you need to focus on the specific situation. So that was the scenario thinking which I was already introducing in the response to that question. That is where you need to focus your data scientists and all the people that are working with the data on to get that right. And finally, and I think that is very important, you need to think about what is coming next. What is the next normal? How are we going to respond into that? What is important, and prepare for that. So yes, it's firefighting, very important, 1 and 2, but also already preparing for the next level. Because if you're just made it through the crisis, but then are not prepared, then again, you're going to be impacted by that. So think about what investments which you would like to do, what KPIs which you would like to do, and really think through in terms of also how you can use your data ethically. And that is, I think, the closing remark which I would like to make. This COVID-19 pandemic is another proof point that you really need to embark or to continue with the adoption of data-driven transformations. Put data first. That would be my recommendation. And I would like to thank you for your participation. And I already said, feel free to connect either via email or for LinkedIn. I also would like to thank Tata Consultancy Services and ICT Media for the collaboration in the study that we did. And I would like to thank Marla Dance for providing input and challenging me for this presentation specifically. And again, if you want to download the report, here is the link. And again, it's for free. That brings us at the top of the hour. So can I hand over to you, William?
Perfect. Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for this very insightful presentation, Professor Erik. Very, very appreciate your presence here. Thank you very much to all of you for attending the High Performance Digital Organizations, What Data-Driven Leadership is Needed Beyond COVID-19 webinar, brought to you by the University of Manchester Middle East Centre. We really do hope you have enjoyed the session, and please do stay safe and do take care of yourselves, and see you all soon for a future webinar. Thank you very much for your time, and have a very good end to your day. Thank you.